You don't lose your strength when you get old, you lose it slowly, starting around age 30. And by the time you notice it, most of the change has already happened. In the United States, around 300,000 people over the age of 65 fracture a hip every year. And roughly 1 in 5 will die within a year of that fracture. Not because the bone itself is fatal, but because of everything that follows: loss of mobility, complications, and a system that no longer has the reserve to recover. What you're looking at here is where that process begins. This process has a name: sarcopenia. It's the gradual loss of muscle mass and function with age, formally defined by the European Working Group on Sarcopenia in older people. And it begins earlier than most people expect. Not at 60, not at 50, closer to 30. At first, nothing looks different. Strength feels the same. Movement feels the same. There's no clear signal that anything is changing, but underneath that stability, a slow shift has already begun. By age 70, the average person has lost about 30% of their muscle mass compared to their peak. Not half, not catastrophic, but enough to change how the body performs under stress. To understand why this happens, you have to look at how muscle is maintained. At the microscopic level, your muscles are not static structures. They are constantly being rebuilt. Every day, proteins inside the muscle fiber are broken down into smaller components, recycled, and replaced with new proteins built from amino acids in your diet. This process is called protein turnover. When you're young, this system is balanced. The amount of protein being built is roughly equal to the amount being broken down. That balance keeps the size and strength of the muscle stable over time. It's not that nothing is happening, it's that everything happening cancels out. With age, that balance begins to shift, not dramatically, not in a way you would notice in a single day or even a single year, but gradually the system moves out of equilibrium. A little less protein is built, a little more is broken down. The difference is small, but it repeats every day. And over time, those small daily deficits accumulate into a measurable loss of muscle. This is not a failure of the system, it's a drift in how the system operates. At the same time, your muscles become less responsive to the signals that tell them to grow. When you eat protein, your body breaks it down into amino acids and releases signals that activate muscle protein synthesis. One of the central pathways involved in this process is commonly referred to as mTOR. You don't need to know the full biochemical detail. What matters is what it does. It acts like a switch. When activated, it tells the muscle, build. In younger muscle, this signal is strong. A typical meal containing protein is enough to activate the pathway and stimulate growth or maintenance. But with age, the same input produces a weaker response. The signal still exists, the pathway still functions, but it requires more stimulus to reach the same level of activation. This is called anabolic resistance. It doesn't shut muscle growth off. It raises the threshold required to trigger it. Muscle is not just tissue, it's part of a control system. Each muscle fiber is connected to a motor neuron, which sends signals that tell it when to contract and how much force to generate. This connection is what allows muscle to function. With age, some of these neural connections are lost. When that happens, the muscle fiber loses its input. In some cases, a neighboring neuron can extend a new branch and take over the disconnected fiber. This process is called reinnervation. When it works, the fiber is preserved, but over time, this process becomes less efficient. Fewer fibers are successfully reconnected, more are left without input, and fibers without input don't remain stable indefinitely. They shrink, weaken, and can eventually be lost. Muscle also has a built-in repair system. Every time a muscle fiber experiences stress or minor damage, specialized cells called satellite cells activate. These cells move to the damaged area, multiply, and help rebuild the structure of the fiber. When you're young, this process is efficient and reliable. Damage occurs, repair follows, the system restores itself. But with age, this process changes. The satellite cells are still present, they don't disappear, but they become less responsive to the signals that activate them. The response is slower, the repair is less complete. Small areas of damage remain partially unresolved, and over time, those small imperfections accumulate, not enough to cause immediate failure, but enough to reduce overall quality and resilience. By the time you reach your 30s, multiple systems are shifting at the same time. Protein synthesis is less responsive. Breakdown slightly exceeds rebuilding. Neural connections are being lost. Repair mechanisms are slower. Individually, each of these changes is manageable. Together, they begin to compound. The system doesn't collapse. It becomes less efficient across multiple dimensions at once, and that's when the rate of loss begins to accelerate. This is where the numbers from the beginning come from. Less muscle means less reserve. Reserve is what allows your body to absorb stress, a stumble, a fall, an illness, and recover from it. As that reserve declines, the consequences of the same event become more severe. A fall that would have been insignificant at 40 becomes dangerous at 70. A fracture becomes harder to recover from, and recovery itself depends on systems that are already under strain. That's how a structural change at the microscopic level leads to real-world outcomes years later. But this is not a one-way system. Even in advanced age, the underlying mechanisms are still active. In a landmark study, researchers worked with frail adults in their 90s living in a nursing home. These were not healthy, independent individuals. They were people with significant physical limitations. The intervention was simple: a supervised resistance training program, 3 sessions per week, for 10 weeks. The primary exercise was a leg press. At the end of the study, the results were not subtle. Strength increased dramatically, on average by more than 170%. Muscle size increased as well. What this shows is not that aging doesn't matter, it shows that the system remains responsive. The pathways are still there. The capacity to adapt is still present. But the threshold is higher. The input required is greater. You don't lose muscle overnight, you lose it slowly, which means you also have time, not a few years, decades. The most important part of this process is not what happens at 70, it's what happens between 30 and 60. That's where the trajectory is set. Muscle is one system that changes over time. Sleep is another. In this series, we're mapping the systems that shift as the body ages, not as isolated problems, but as connected processes.